can't beat us, join us. Please bring your coinage. We sing 3-pointers, money shots all net, all vets. Bums we not, jet skiing in them sunny spots. With women edible like gummy drops. Dummy stop, dummy stop. No weapon form can intercept a storm. Once my intellect is on, I'm projecting on magnetic fields and interact with blacks with athletic bills. I'm all about growth and development like residents of Ebbets Fields. Not to choose between woo and chew. We wanna line them colors up like a Rubik's Cube and fade to black, yeah, the truest hue. When you say the black man is God, who you alluded to? The usual Clarence 13X, a worthy guess. The words expressed come from the word in flesh. Elijah M, the NOI versus Leviathan. Messiah sent from the heavenly branches. 7 P's from since G-Dub cut down a cherry tree in the wilderness of North Mex, and we flossing death and forced aggression, or forced perception, forced protection, or forced confessions. It's all a lesson.
The sorcerers from Corsica, killer tonics, sticks and drums like the Philharmonic Orchestra. You niggas still playing harmonicas from officers, fabric softener. Jive turkeys popping 5 perkies, playing with keys, the Scotch stores type. For that soft white, we could've caught life, just being forthright. First class on my 4th flight, popping out like Fortnite. Every night we lit like Porsche lights. The meek shall inherit the earth, oh yeah, the scorched type. And these niggas, they some hoes in these streets. Me, I'm 10 toes in these streets. They lost their souls, niggas got holes in their feet. Shit, I'm just worried about the craft and how to perfect it. Not worried about the craft, yeah, that's out of perspectives. Focus on the chip like I'm Robert Kraft, and then how to protect it. It's the waves of the oceans. Get to the money, nigga, save your emotion. Descendant of the slaves in the graves in the oceans. Mastermind that the waves is in motions. These niggas, they addicted to the folly, addicted to that molly. Making me a movie, them sticks made of holly. I'm Dr. Manhattan, sitting on top of Manhattan. When I get all 5 rings, snap my fingers and pop up on satin. Dressed in all black, yeah, drop top the Phantom. Blast.
Crumb TV.
Peace to the family, peace to you and yours. Peace to the family, peace to you and yours. Welcome, 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 welcome to Know the Ledger 444. You are now rocking with the best. Yes, this is your host for this afternoon, Brother Red Pillar, and I am joined by my esteemed guest, my good brother Knowledge Born Allah in the building. Peace, God.
Peace to the God. Peace to the family. Peace to the motivation and spark for what I do as a journalist, ethereal and otherwise. My brother, the J Red Pillar.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. We are back in the building. The family might not know, but we do's this. Me and you, we got a few classic episodes going back years in the game. You know what I mean? Years in the game. We on old servers in Bosnia somewhere. You know what I'm talking about? Old shows, blog talk radio days and whatnot. So
it don't even exist no more, right? That's crazy.
Yeah, it don't even exist no more, bro. It's a bygone era. Introduce yourself to the family. Let them know who you are for those who may be unfamiliar with Knowledge Born Allah.
Put this on real quick. Shout out to the Black Dot, him and his family.
Shout out to Dot Urban XTV.
Urban Excellence. Iconic. You know what I'm saying? So I'm a student of the community that they call so-called conscious nowadays. I inherit this way of life from my mother and father who walked the streets of New York and New Jersey, helping people get off drugs, helping people get out of the prostitution life and all of the streets. So I am their inheritance. You know what I mean? So many of us came here by way of some police shooting or some book that they read that they said changed their life, but I was born in it, you know, and sworn in it. So definitely here as one who wrought those irregular hours in consciousness and lectures and all of these things to, you know, be a descendant and a disciple.
Indeed, indeed, my brother. So today, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very interesting conversation. This is going to be a conversation. This is a part one of a conversation that is going to be ongoing. I am not exactly sure how many parts we will dedicate to this topic, but this is a very interesting topic. Y'all often hear me speak about the armed forces. Y'all often hear me speak about boot camp and basic training. And so many of us that are in this field over the years, we realized and we noticed and we paid attention to the numerous quote unquote stories, even black swan events that were tied to members of the armed forces, even up to this very current moment. All right, there is controversy brewing in the scientific world with the sudden disappearances and the unaliving of very prominent scientists and whistleblowers.
Right.
We're gonna have an intricate build, and we're gonna peel some layers back and take a deep dive into this world. All right. So today's episode is entitled "From Boot Camp to Broadcast." All right, from boot camp to broadcast. So I want to start this out by asking you, my good brother, what was the time that you spent in the armed services? What was the length, and what was the stint?
The length of the stint sound like a bid, right? Did a
Yeah.
stretch. And I say that because the two worlds are akin to one another. I was in the United States Army for 17 years. 5 of those years was spent in Iraq and Afghanistan. So there's a space where you go, and there's a space where you grow. So this is kind of connected in between 1997 and 2014. So there are spaces that exist where being exposed to the life cycles of the military as a whole, but the Army in specific, right? Department of Defense is all of the armed services together. And the Department of the Army, they have their own specter and span. So the recruiting aspects of the military are akin to some of the pitfalls. Red, if I could tell you there's one step away from the prison cell, and the difference between the prison cell and the military environment might be a duffel bag, a recruiter. You understand what I'm saying? Like, I'm from North. My recruiter went and got my picture off the wall of Green Street, the infamous Green Street. My cousin took his own life in Green Street in custody. So there was a place, there was a place in space and time. So the circa 97 is the war report. The circa 97 is the war report. Capone Noriega, New York get the bloody money, TONY, sort of facet of 97. All of the sights and the sounds of people
Yes.
wearing fatigues for the first time in their life. You
Yes.
know what I
Yes.
mean? So,
Yes.
so between them and, Killer Army at the time, there was
Queensbridge, to be honest with you, that the whole Queensbridge movement and then Brownsville with the MOP movement, those were the
right,
fatigue. That's that fatigue era. Sneaker
right.
Uzi on the island through my army jacket lining.
Army jacket liner, right? Nas made it famous, right? And then, Infamous made it infamous. So those waves, I went to Fort Benning at that time, and somebody asked what my job was. I joined the infantry uh, at the young age of 18 years old, and I was in the infantry. And in the infantry in Fort Benning, I was an 11 X-ray, and an 11 X-ray is they give you whatever the army needs when you're done. So uh, I was a mortarman, so 11 Charlie for the people who are listening. And I got stationed upstate New York in Fort Drum after that, because the infantry and the artillery And SAFRA school and all of those places are one station unit training. So you don't go to another place for an additional set of training. So I was on Fort Benning for like 8 months or so. So over there to watch a cycle or cycles of airborne schools start and stop, see the Ranger Battalion, see some aspects of sniper school, all of the things that Sand Hill could afford you with. You understand what I'm saying in regards to what it is, and also, permanent party duty, status. So when you don't have any orders, you're doing a whole bunch of details. So the details afforded me the opportunity to actually see the difference between Sand Hill, the training environment, and Kelly Hill, which was the permanent station environment. So going from there to Fort Drum, I got to Fort Drum at the end of '97, going into '98. I went on my first deployment to Haiti. That was the S4K4 generation of the Army, where it was peacekeeping rotation. So going somewhere for 45 days or 90 days was considered a long stint, right? How adaptable the military would become going from 6 months to 15 months in theater, something different, right? So 17 years altogether, back to your question, Brother Red Pillar, 17 years in the Army, 5 of those years in Iraq and Afghanistan, but there was a bunch of other places that was there in that regard.
Indeed. So that wave that that you got swept up in was a very interesting wave, because so many of our younger generations, so many different generations, it spanned the generations, the 9/11 boots on the ground rush.
Right.
It spanned about 4 generations of melanated men and women. Can you paint a picture as to what that whole environment was like in the early days, when people were super gun ho and a lot of people were basically just out for blood, um, based off of the erroneous stories that were being told to them?
Well, improper propaganda was at an all-time high. You're dealing with the drawdown aspect, as we were speaking before we went live. There are life cycles in the military that go from a plus up situation to a drawdown situation. So in the advent of a conflict prior to the Vietnam era, it would just be draft 1A, right? Draft 1A. So that meant that, if your number came up at graduation, it was waiting for you at graduation. You know what I'm saying? So if y'all go back and look at the movie Dead Presidents, the movie Dead Presidents did a wonderful job of illustrating what the improper propaganda campaign actually was from the military level and the separation between the military and the civilian. Lawrence Tate's father was a Korean War veteran who came home. That's how they was able to afford the house that they lived in. And when Lorenz Tate's character, Anthony, wanted to join the Marines like his father did before him, his father didn't say anything. Isaiah Washington was his brother. Y'all know his mama was, everybody's mama slash auntie. So Isaiah Washington was going to school to become a doctor, and he looked at his brother as if he had lost his mind. You understand what I'm saying? And when they left the table, he was talking to his pops. His pops said at low breath, "I'll talk to her." So, like, there's a dichotomy in regards to what this total control environment does to your mind and your psyche and your being. And, seeing her husband, Isaiah Washington's character, seeing the father and the effects of what it was something that you would have to together to show the effects of what the war cycles look like. So through that Korean conflict, after that, there's a drawdown period going into later on the Vietnam era sort of conflict. So from one generation to the next, because there are generation life cycles, right? So Anthony decides to volunteer versus getting drafted. So the people he was in the milk truck with, they, Chris Tucker's character and the other Hispanic, they both were draft 1A. You see what I'm saying? So they, what Chris Tucker said about the guy who was like the pyro guy, the explosive guy, was that he said you was a recruiter's best dream type of situation. So John Singleton, the movie is fusing the roles of profile and archetype type of situation, but they did not show their training environment, right? They didn't show their training environment because in the Marine Corps, they had already showed you Heartbreak Ridge. They had already showed you Full Metal Jacket, right? So most people have their military experience of the training environment, whether directly or indirectly, with the mind frame of the Full Metal Jacket military training environment, right? So if you look at those, particular apparatus, these are life cycle effects, and for you to be black and OD green at that time, you saw where the afros were in effect. You saw where they were dapping each other. You also saw in that movie Dead Presidents. I'm using the movies because they instill patriotism with you through the movies. When you saw the propaganda of Robert F. Williams and Mabel Williams being in Vietnam, you heard "Soul Brother, Go Home" is not your war. So that was a staunch sort of uh, pivot from what the stories that were being told on the battlefield. On the battlefield, they were very fratricidal. They didn't believe that black service members had the right to share the same uniforms. Unbeknownst to them, any conflict that involved America from its inception or pre-inception, you know, black service members were in all of those skirmishes. So, their presidents did a very good sort of scene in regards to painting a picture of a black man coming home from war and not being welcomed by his nation, right? So he had to resort to what he had to resort to in that regard. So when they show these aspects of what it was in the bush, these are
Yeah.
real life stories that they're recalling. You know what I'm
Mm,
saying? And they're doing their best to illustrate them. So
right.
if you look at that versus looking at Predator, the the
So just for
film,
the record, I'm sorry. For the record, you're saying that there is accuracy in these war um wartime movies that we've all grown up being
yes,
programmed with?
yes. Because you asked about the black experience, I'm pointing you to
Yes.
these particular movies. In contrast, otherwise I would be talking about Apocalypse Now or some of these other ones
Right. Yeah, right. We
because
know that our
they're painting
experience
a
is somewhat
picture.
different.
Yeah, right, right. There was one black dude in Red Dawn, right? He was the teacher because that was the Troops to Teachers campaign that they were pushing in the 80s,
Mm,
that they revamped in the 90s and then suspended and then revamped in the 2000s. So when the brother went out there, they lit him up. You understand what I'm saying? Because he had
right.
already had a battlefield sort of assessment. There was no reason for these people to be parachuting into where they were, right? So the dead president's situation, they taught you about black syphilis, right? They taught you about the drug use that was over there that was running rampant, and also the aftermath of post traumatic stress that they would call shell shock. They had termed it shell shock at the time because of the after effects of all of the artillery. I was a mortarman, 40 millimeter sort of situation in all of the spaces of the bush. So these are all aspects of life, and they had, black service members in some of the roughest places. America is no longer in Vietnam. for that particular purpose. This is before Agent Orange, right? And all of these other aspects that come into play. So when you start looking at generational life cycles, you have that life cycle, and then going to the all volunteer army, we see the advent of like a Colin Powell situation when you start looking at Desert Storm, Desert Shield sort of situation. But before that, you get to the Iran Contra sort of circa where they're showing you GI Joe and they're showing you, Contra, the video games and all of these other things from the Reaganomics era. So the Reaganomics era was supposed to be sort of a peacetime era. However, there's a propaganda campaign that existed in the eyes of Rambo, in the eyes of Predator, in the eyes of some of these other aspects, right? Rocky was a very large recruiting sort of aspect tool that was utilized to sort of separate and show in the realm of service to your nation, right? So this became a great push that we were dealing with in that regard. So the life of a service member during that time, a black service member, subjected internally and externally. If y'all go look up Sammy Davis Jr. and what happened to him, if y'all go look up some of these other people who went to Hawaii and joined the Marine Corps and joined the Army and the Navy and some of the things that they were subjected to. Antoine Fisher was a movie that was good where they were showing the sort of things with the internal / external conflict. But the last point I'll say on the Dead Presidents movie that they showed was there was no welcome. There were no parades. There were more anti-Vietnam War protests that was spawned in regards to that. So you already had your country against you. Then you already had this corporation that was against you at the same time. So seeking to soldier and do your duty as a service member, you were met with all sort of internal and external sort of challenges. But it never stopped the recruiting mechanism to be targeted at you from one place to another. So from the urban or the rural environment into the military recruiting offices, they would find you and you would be special interest in regards to how they would recruit towards you.
So how has that changed with this new form of recruiting where they're going after the gamers
Mhm.
and they are targeting the RPG players and people who can basically fly the drones and do great with simulation killing based off of this new mode or this new form of warfare where they're merging man and machine.
Excellent question. You look at Outside the Wire, but before I even get to Outside the Wire, remember Enemy of the State. What did they tell the people in Enemy of the State with Will Smith? That this was a training simulation. So the people that were behind the controls that were surveilling him and doing all of the hacking and all of those things, they thought they were doing a training operation and they were profiling this man. So before the movie where they were using the AI to call the people on the phone and was telling them that they was activated, we were the maturing candidates that was there that were pushing the propaganda. We were the test subject, right? So he was enemy of the state, Independence Day, right? But he was the same guy that was in 6 degrees of separation. So there's they can put somebody in as a way like a Denzel Washington, right? Denzel Washington was in Carbon Copy. He was in Carbon Copy, but he also was in Glory. You understand what I'm
Yes,
saying?
he
He was
was.
also in he was also in the Soldier Story. You
Yes, he
understand?
was.
Like
His recruit,
so,
right? His man, early Denzel, the way they was
yeah,
rolling my guy out, like
yeah,
early theater, like post theater Denzel,
yes,
he was selling, he was out there selling fatigues, bro. He was pushing the
100.
line. Yeah, they
Yeah, Courage
officer and
Under
a
Fire.
gentleman.
Yeah,
He was
Crimson
I
Tide.
damn
Like
near
yeah,
cried and watching him get whooped in that movie that they robbed him for. He's supposed to get the award for that off the rip.
yeah, yeah, yeah. There were They were messing with our minds, right? So I was building with one of the guys at the past couple of days, and I said they showed him in carbon copy, and in carbon copy he couldn't play basketball. Remember?
Oh,
He
pardon
couldn't
me.
play.
In
He
carbon
couldn't
copy,
play.
he couldn't play basketball.
Yeah. So how's he whooping Ray Allen and he got game? Because he
Mm,
actually played basketball in junior college, right? You understand what I'm saying? And that scene, they were going over that scene and saying that he wasn't supposed to score any points. He scored like 2 or 3 points on Ray Allen.
right.
So they play
And what was
they'll
Ray
play the
Allen's
game.
character name?
Jesus Shuttlesworth. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So they put all of these things in here because they're seeding things in the mind, right? His father was in prison. They had Jesus locked up, right? So they crucified him, right? His sister's name was Mary. So they put all of these little things in front of your face to where they'll show you and have you happy and applauding your own demise, right? So the propaganda tools with man becoming machine, the first man that became the machine in front of us was the black dude who was in that suit for Predator. If y'all go back and watch the first Predator and the second Predator, it was the 7 foot tall black dude who was married to the lady on 227 who died from AIDS.
Right. He played Alien too, didn't he?
Yeah, yeah.
Was
And
he the
he was
African who they used his frame for Alien?
they used his frame for Alien, and they also used his frame for Harry and the Hendersons.
Mm.
Same guy,
Okay.
same guy.
Same guy.
So they can show you looking deadly, and then they can show you looking friendly under their control, right?
I'm
In
thinking the Green
Predator,
Mile.
right? Yes. In Predator, he becomes the sacrificial lamb for everybody that was on the screen to run for office. Arnold Schwarzenegger,
Mm.
governor. The other guy, Jesse the Body Ventura, governor, right? Both of them are
Governor, right.
entertainers.
And Bill
Who
Duke
was
is in that.
also an entertainer that turned governor? Ronald Reagan. You
Ronald Reagan
understand?
is that. Yeah,
So this
Ronald.
is in the height of Reaganomics, right? And the other guy, his name was something Lanham. He thought he was going to be able to do the same thing. The guy who what they showed him like he was the Native American tracker.
Right.
He was the same guy as them, and he went for office. He ran for office about 7 or 8 times and was unsuccessful. He
Yeah,
thought he was
ran
going
that
to join the
over.
ranks as them, uh, but it never happened. And he wound up doing a bid because of it.
Right.
So they push all of these agendas through what it is, right? Bill Duke went behind the camera, for 40 years. But everybody that was in that space, they had an opportunity where it was them against the world, Carl Weathers, right? They did the whole Rocky thing with him. You understand what I'm saying?
And
So
Carl Weathers, at some point, he was like he was our go-to.
yes,
Carl Weathers was supposed to take us there. You
right.
feel me?
Action Jackson,
Action Jackson, bro.
Apollo Creed, yes,
Apollo
yes,
Creed. Like,
yes,
hello.
yeah.
We talking Apollo Creed. Like, I remember being a youth. Apollo Creed was bigger than Mr. T.
Word is bond. And they had intersection at the same time,
They
right?
did have an
That's the fight.
intersection.
That's the fight we wanted to see. Mr. T was a bodyguard for Hulk Hogan, Muhammad Ali, and Apollo Creed and some of the others, right? Joe
B.A.
Frazier,
Baracus.
right? So
He was
yeah,
scarier than B.A. Baracus was scary, bro. He was the
right,
epitome of the scary black dude. Clubber Lang, my nigga. He was the
yeah,
epitome. Before Wesley Snipes came, he was the epitome of the scary black dude with all that gold on.
right,
I pity a fool. He wasn't.
right,
He was. You know what I mean? You didn't see him. He keying with them. I know
right.
he was the biggest kikier behind when the cameras was off. More than like he's a teddy bear. but
Now
Mr. T
look
played
at
that
how
role.
they did him though. And shout out to the God. The God was building with me about that. They gave him a 6. His 6, he was on 18. He was the sergeant. He was the engineer. He was the master builder, right? He
Mm-hmm.
was Hannibal Barak, right? But Hannibal was the same guy who played George C. Scott and Patton and all that. He was not going to be somebody on the team with no purpose. His
Right.
purpose was supposed to be the man with the plan. And they did him dirty. They drug him, got him to get on the plane, right? Every time. And they went to his mama's house. He told his mama he was in charge of the team. Mind you,
Right.
they on the run from the police. They on the run eating, right? They on the run eating, and they went to his mama's house and lied to his mama and made it seem like he was in charge.
Right.
So Hannibal would come with the cigar and say, "I love it when the plan comes together," but he did nothing for the plan. Nothing, right?
He really
But
didn't.
he was the high ranking guy. He was the colonel.
He was the
So he
colonel. He
was
was the top dude. Right.
the master of disguise on how they show militarization, but he would take credit for everybody's work. He
So
couldn't fly the
Face,
plane.
right. Right. Face was the master of disguise. Can you get into that aspect of what they were showing you with Face and
Yeah,
how operatives, how that's somewhat of a more unspoken thing, but
yeah,
I think that's at the top of the pyramid in the armed services, switching up your appearances and things of that. That is the top of propaganda.
right. So he was like for all intents and purposes, a war dog and a con man. And they hit us with Two Face, right? The other face was not physically appealing. He was taller. He didn't have a presence that would be captivating. So the other guy, Templeton Peck, right, was his name. He could be anybody. He convinced the scientists that his name was Dr. Pepper, like the drink. You understand what I'm saying? And they had quarter with him. So the ability to be able to move, one of the things that came from the spook who sat by the door was your ability to be able to cloak yourself. You know, the Dan Freeman character with the voiceover is telling the black people a man with a black man with a broom or a mop and a bucket is virtually invisible, could go anywhere, and then a smiling black man could get in anywhere. You understand what I'm saying? So that ability to be able to cloak and
Right.
camouflage
That's George. George.
was something that you know he moved around to be able to do. So him and the colonel, they both had the ability to be able to become somebody else to watch and observe things close. But Face did it bareface.
Right.
You understand? Versus Hannibal doing it with a disguise. So he had to disguise himself, and Face just had to play the role. He could be whoever he needed to be, a scientist, a doctor, a lawyer, whomever the case, a military man, all of that, because he had the appearance. You believed his face. His face was innocent, right? So, in order for them to be able to get out, they had to go get Murdoch, of all people, the name Murdoch, out of the VA. They would break him out of the crazy house. They would drug BA to get him on the plane and go on a mission, right?
Right.
So all of these logistical things are never concerned, and nobody ever died in the 18. Nobody,
Right.
right? all of the shots, all these explosions, big
Right.
explosions, nothing. Like nobody. I'm like somebody had. I'm watching it just to see if somebody. I'm like, yo, they
And
pulling this dude
they
out
be
of the
slow
car.
motion in the air with the blow up shit. They the
Right,
ones that have people running around, or, you know what I'm saying, jumping off of
right,
cars and all of that, thinking
right,
that they was gonna go
right,
in slow motion.
right. Yeah, we just nutty out here, right? And then they had Mr. T and Hulk Hogan in the scene where they picked up a car together to cut the alarm off. So people thinking like, oh, all right, this is what the tow truck do. So the era of recruiting, they did it very silently, and they also did it with the cartoons. GI Joe. That GI Joe era was something that they did. They had a Rambo cartoon, all of that. So there was the back to the role playing games.
Let's
They
get
sought
into
after these people very
let's get
young.
into the GI Joe, please, because I get into that on this show, but you know, you can we could bounce off of each other with this. First it was the toys. They had
Right,
the original GI Joe figures were big. They were like
right, right,
stand up toys and whatnot. Then they launched the cartoon to sell the smaller toys, but the
right.
propaganda on that, I would say that that's the most accurate cartoon that depicts everything that's going on in this administration right now. But please, let's get
Right.
into that.
The, so we got to do that akin to wrestling, right? Wrestling was the greatest propaganda tool that they utilized to show us the world. The World Wrestling Federation that they changed into the World Wrestling Entertainment, right? From father to son. You know, Vince McMahon's father, you know, had wrestling situated in a small place in the Midwest. You know, unbelievable, right? But he made his son buy it from him, and then Vince began to tell the stories, right? So he had storyboards for characters. He took regular wrestling, okay looking, you know, okay kind of guys, and gave them larger than life personas. So their personas were greater than their actual capabilities, but you didn't know it. So they were okay professional wrestlers, right? And he made them immortal. The story that Undertaker told about his situation was he was on WCW and they was about to cut him because he wanted a little bit more money. I think he said like $100 more or something. And they was like, nah, get up out of here. You ain't even worth it. And they said go to the WWF because they're looking for some guys. So WCW guy tells him to go to WWF, and he said he goes to meet Vince, and he goes to Vince's house for the weekend or something like that. And he said Vince wasn't impressed with him, and he said I'll get back to you. And he said during the holiday season they had some gimmick in wrestling. He said he didn't want to be the 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 toilet bowl man or the, you know, whatever it was. It was some kind of gimmick that he had that he was just hoping that he didn't get called for that. And he said Vince McMahon called him and he said, "Is this the Undertaker?" And he said, "Yes, this is the Undertaker." So he comes in with the whole gimmick of the Undertaker, and he's infamous forever. So it's proof that he could take you where nobody knew who you were and turn you into somebody larger than life. Hulk Hogan worked for Vince's father, and not then he worked for Vince. So if you look at Hulk Hogan, you look at Sergeant Slaughter, you look at Macho Man Randy Savage, all of those things in regards to what it looked like in America. Then you start thinking about like Tatanka, Texas Tornado. They start to show you a demographic in regards to the people who were responding to wrestling. So now they had to give you, you know, Iron Sheik. They had to give you Andre the Giant. They start, you know, giving you these personages in regards to what it is from the world stage, right? Kamala. Kamala is from Texas, but they had you believe that he was from Uganda, right? If you look up his name, you'll see why Shorty didn't win the presidency because uh, Trump was so engorged with Vince McMahon that he was with him since the 90s. So all of the big events sort of situation space, they became something that's hyper dimensionalized forever, right? So Trump in office became Mr. McMahon in wrestling. So Vince McMahon is the CEO. Mr. McMahon is a wrestling personage, and he did the same thing with his children. He turned them into McMahons. Even his wife, you know, Linda McMahon, who works in the Trump administration. All of these, you know, propaganda wars gave you a sense of patriotism and a connection, right? So GI Joe and GI Joe, they said no one is half the battle, right? So in the army, they have a personas for leaders is be, know, and do. So if knowing is half the battle, the other half becomes what you become and what you do, right? So knowledge before you wisdom or understanding this, you know what I mean? So they gave you these personages on the television screen, and they were the action figures that you wanted to have the whole collection. They gave you the squared circle. They turned the boxing ring into the wrestling ring, and they put it in the Coliseum in the arena, so you would be cheering for men in tights. You understand what I'm saying? So they pushed this sort of patriotism agenda through wrestling. They decided the fate of the world. There's no coincidence that the former president Barack Obama sound like The Rock from the Nation of Domination, right? He was somebody who come from the family of wrestling, and they could use a sleight of hand, a prestidigitation, to have him appear other than who he was, right? So him, Rikishi, Yokozuna, all of them come from the same sort of wrestling family.
Right.
So the wrestling family became a personage to where they're showing the legacy from his father to the family members to all of these sort of personages, because we talked about the action figures, from the sort of life-size images to the smaller images to the video games to the cartoon. They had a damn wrestling cartoon. You know what I'm saying? So the propaganda wars have been there the entire time in regards to what it is, because the defense budget had $1 billion spending industry in regards to recruiting. So just to segue just a tiny bit, right? Uh, the Colin Kaepernick situation was bad for recruiting, with him kneeling and not saluting the flag. So the defense budget allowed for the colors to be set at these sporting events, because that was another aspect of a recruiting tool that was direct to consumer in these sporting arenas. So they're already in the arenas, already hopped up looking for something, and then they give you some sort of patriotism when they post the colors, and you see the people, the men and women, the service members in their uniforms. There's something about that uniform, right? You go back to what's that movie? Iron Eagle, you go back to all of the Top Gun, all of those things, right? There's something that never leaves your psyche. You want to be one of those guys or girls in the uniform, right? Uh, American Ninja, all of the propaganda movies that they utilize, right? The same guy that was in I'm Gonna Get You Sucker. This 57 of you punks against Kung Fu Joe, right? So more akin and aligned to the personages that you can become, right? He pulled out the picture of Bruce Lee. He was like, "You study under Bruce Lee?" He said, "Yeah, acting." You understand what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
this becomes the bait and switch, where they'll show you Keenan Ivory Wayans, right? He's like, "Oh, I was training for combat, but I ain't never been in it." And he was
Right.
talking to Red from the Five Heartbeats. He was like, "I be damn a secretary," and he told him he was a secretary too. You see what I'm saying? So all of these, mind maps and personages that they'll show you, and then they'll remove the veil.
Mm. Interesting. Indeed. So let's fast forward a little bit. And no. Matter of fact, let's not fast forward. I don't want to. Let's stay over here with the propaganda that we were getting from the cartoons through GI Joe.
Mhm.
I would also say Transformers played a big part.
Right,
Later on down the line, when they went Hollywood, when they decided to adapt these TV shows and these cartoons into movies, the Pentagon, and they
right,
were directly hands on with the movies. They made GI Joe a army propaganda movie. They also
right.
made Transformers a army propaganda movie. That was them throwing their budget in on it. I
Right.
want to know, before we get into those movies, we have Full Metal Jacket, we have
Yeah,
Platoon,
yeah,
very strong movies in terms of the just the underlying recruitment aspect. There are scenes that still live with me to this day, that I
yeah,
remember watching Platoon, especially when they were in the village, and they basically unalived the dude that was hopping on one leg. It was like a Viet Cong
right,
and whatnot. very brutal
Right.
depictions. The lard ass Full Metal Jacket with William DeVoe running, and they
Right.
was
Right.
gunning them down. Hamburger Hill, and then
Right.
of course it culminated with Saving Private Ryan,
Yes.
right? So can you give us some insight on the heavy propaganda that was taking place in the film and media in Hollywood, and how that was affecting the troops and the armed service people that you were around in real life?
Well, what's the guy's name? He was a gunnery sergeant in the Marines for real, and they Stanley Kubrick gave him latitude. He gave him all of the scenes. They put him in Paris Island. They put him in his drill instructor capacity and allow him free reign in the training environment. So everybody else that was there were actual recruits going through, and they were filming Paris. There's a stain, right? When they're doing basic rifle marksmanship, when they're doing drilling ceremony, when they're doing physical training, all of these aspects are all real, right? Uh, what was that movie? You're in the army now, all that stuff. They're all on real military bases, right? So if you look at the military bases, when you start looking at that environment is something that is a total control environment. So uh, I think his name was something Ermy or something like that. Somebody smart, they know his name. He talked about race. He talked about uh, this environment that is supposed. If you're not supposed to wear this uniform, that's his job. He showed you the job of the sergeant. He showed you the job of the instructor was to weed out all non-hackers who don't pack the gear to serve in my beloved corps. That's the direct transformation, right? So he had to break them down to the lowest level and build them back up because you cannot function in a wartime environment with thoughts that are different than the thoughts of everybody around you unless you're in a position of leadership, right? So there's a place for you to be able to follow orders without thinking about them, and then there's a place where you take the orders that you receive and have a plan and strategy to be able to execute them under fire, under duress. So the training environments that they show something, right? When they were going from you know the the left shoulder, right shoulder, arms, he was talking about 4 inches from your chest. That's the real thing. Put the rifle around your head, not your head around the rifle. That was the real thing. These are all sort of training environment things and nuances that you go through. That's not your daddy's shotgun, private cowboy. Like when he's saying these kinds of things, right? Are you quitting on me? Then fine, quit. And like that, like he put you in the mind frame of recruit training and showed you what it was. Everybody came in there with hair and all this other stuff. They shaved everybody's head off, their hair off. So they take away your individual identity and you're known by your last name, your rank and your last name. So your first name has no sort of reference in there because as an enlisted man, this is how you referred to, or enlisted person, right? From in the officer realm, they call you by your first name. They don't really call you by your last name. So there's a space where which the warrant officers and the officers, commission officers, connect with each other like that. But you know, publicly, it's a sir, yes sir, no ma'am, no sir sort of situation. But privately, they call each other by their first name, right? If you outrank somebody, you call them by their first name. So that's an identity that they have on the officer side versus the enlisted side, right?
Can I
So
can I add on?
go
For
ahead.
those that were in the boot camp through shock, and in different states they have different names, but that would be a court ordered punitive
Right,
measure. They will call
right,
you inmate
right.
and your number.
Hmm.
No first name, no last name. It's just inmate. But continue,
Yeah.
please.
No, that's a whole world that connects us together, right?
Yeah.
It's a whole world that connects us together. So you don't have an identity, right? That was the scene in the X movie. That was something that was profound. What's your number? I forgot it. And they took them into segregation for that. So in that training environment, this is what they're training you to be a part of a collective. If y'all watch that movie 300, there was a reason why the guy whose father was in the Corps, he couldn't join. He said if he couldn't raise his shield, we don't want him with us. And he wound up betraying them, right? Uh, every man that was in that outfit amongst the 300, they all had a specific duty, and everybody put their life in each other's hand. So that barrier of protection for them to be able to move, they moved as one unit, right? So if y'all saw Shaka Zulu, the miniseries, it's the same sort of concept. They had the shields that cover the whole body, so they could move under direct attack and still be able to provide a shield for one another, and then spread out and be able to eliminate their enemies. They said that the Zulus would be able to run 40 miles in the battle, take out their enemies, and run back home. They said when they came, they were coming because the earth would shake, similar to earthquake tremors. So that was the regime that the Brits and everybody else from EU, when they came, that was the advent of Shaka Zulu that fought them for 80 years. So this sort of space of breaking you from your own identity. And if you have a conflict in identity, you become institutionalized, right? So you might think you never getting out of prison. You could be in prison for a couple of years and you never come home. Similar to somebody going to a deployment and returning back from a deployment and they never really come home. They're still stuck in that mind frame. They call it institutionalized as well. It's the same terminology. If you worked on a job, you start to think like this is your whole life, what you're going to do after you retire, all of that. These are all syndromes that work on the mind because initiation, shout out to Oba Adedayo, he taught me that it's 90% mental and 10% physical. So those initiations that happen within the mind in that total control environment, it's there. They did the Stanford experiment where they used people as prison guards and prisoners. They supposed to have took kids off of the street. I believe that they was hand selected. They knew exactly who they were going to pick for this particular study, who was going to be the prisoners and who were going to be the prison guards, right? So all they gave the prison guards initially was sunglasses. They gave them sunglasses, and then they might have gave them a baton. No training or anything, just the authority, right? They were proving the point to say how could somebody just submit to orders that were given to them without any sort of influence. They were talking about in the camps of not in, Dachau and Auschwitz that they were just following orders. That's what they said about the German army. That's what they said about the SS as well, that they were just following orders. So back to like the movie with with Platoon and Hamburger Hill and all of these other aspects, what they were showing was heroism, right? So they were showing heroism in the face of danger, right? And then they were showing the dehumanization of your enemy. You cannot look at your enemy from a human perspective. Otherwise, as they said in Full Metal Jacket, then you will become unalive Marines, right? And Marines are not allowed to, check out without permission. You know, this is to the fault, right? These are the things that they took from recruit training, into battle. This is my rifle. There are many like it, but this one is mine. My rifle is my best friend. It is my life. You understand what I'm saying? So this sort of indoctrination of the rifleman's creed is something that they had, ingrained into their being. Once a Marine, always a Marine. Every person from the Marine Corps is your brother. These are all of the things that they utilize to kind of mind map in your mind so that they can stay with you. So the Willem Dafoe turncoat, he was somebody that they had to take out, so
Right.
so to speak. So this is like the thin blue line. You know what I'm saying? Like all of these things have inter lap with one another because of that. So
Facts.
from recruit training to the prisons, industrial complex to the military industrial complex, all of them have an overlap with one another. And they use the movies and the television shows to have it, ever etched in your mind.
Right. Nah, they definitely have done a good job. I mean, we could take it all the way back to MASH.
Right.
Everybody's
Right.
favorite, unfavorite show.
Right. Right. Because that was the hospital. So there was really nothing, sensational about that, right? But they used that hospital environment to give us General Hospital and the rest of these soap operas surrounding the hospital.
Right.
So it's like,
Right.
oh,
That was around that same time of St.
yeah,
Elsewhere, General
right,
Hospital. My dad
right,
used to watch soaps, you feel me? And when
yeah.
that song came on, I dreaded it. And I was like, it's time to go to sleep. Yeah, I knew it was, when that shit came on, all right, it's turn it down,
Yeah,
turn it down.
yes, it's a wrap.
But yeah, man, very interesting, very interesting. Let's talk about these veterans
Yeah,
who have appeared, you know, on numerous, I'm talking about that I can't even count on two hands the
mhm.
amount of incidents that have happened in America where it's almost like you could just count, you could just you could poly market that person is going to be a veteran if there's some type of incident. Can we speak on the MK Ultra? Could we speak on the mind control? Could we speak on the Manchurian candidate aspect of what we see going on with government? Is it possible that they could program an individual in the quote unquote service and then turn that person on like a sleeper cell in the real world?
Of course. Excellent question, right? If I could go back to dead presidents, do you remember the scene that the Lynch Tate character comes home
Yeah.
and he just got fired from the job, and my man hands him the pamphlet. You want to get the man's foot off your neck? Come see us, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's walking to that meeting before he reconnects with the sister, right? He's walking to the meeting. This is a veteran coming home from war, and there's a guy that's right next to him, and he's talking to himself like he's bugged out, flipping. These are two war vets with two different sort of symptomology, but with the same root cause, right? Shell shock. They're both shell shock, right? But they don't show it as it's connected to one another. It's like two ships that pass in the night. The guy who played Cleon, he became ultra religious, right? But he was a savage in the bush, right? Cutting the heads off. He had the totem, right? Uh, the guy who played Smokey, he was getting high all the time. Kirby was a Korean vet. He cut it, he was an amputee, right? So all of these people who were there, they all had some situation with a nation at war to where they could be turned on at any time, right? Kirby went into that store, keep David's character, threw that guy out of the window, and then he said, SOB pulled the wrong leg. You understand what I'm saying? Like it was he had no regard, right? When he had what they would call a flashback, he had no regard for life in that moment, not even his own. So if they could show you something and have it in a cinematic space, they could recreate it. So who was one of the greatest Manchurian candidates? They gave us Denzel. We were talking about Denzel earlier, right? From the carbon copy to all of these other aspects. they could turn him on and turn him off. They could take his life on the film and then put him back in the film. You be like, wait a minute. You go look at Deja Vu, that's what happened, right? So it takes you through this process. Or if you go look at Fallen, you're thinking that he's about to check out. He said, oh, let me tell you about the time that I almost died. Almost, right? They have you on these roller coasters of your mind. So if they can get into your psyche like that, you could see cats that would look at Lorenz Tate and he could go from being old dog in Minister Society to old buddy in Inkwell. You understand what I'm saying? Like, but he's a classically trained actor who was on Family Matters. You forget that he was on Family Matters. You understand what I'm saying? He was Fuffner on Family Matters, right? So they can still utilize these same, sort of situations where they connect with you in a way where you connect with the artist and the artistry so deep that you forget. Like, wait a minute. you think like Robert De Niro and Al Pacino and them are real gangsters in real life. Nobody could tell you because we watched Goodfellas, like we saw, right?
And
we saw
nobody
Casino and all that. Like, yeah, you're an actor, right, from the neighborhood, right? So and they were acting like the people that they saw actually grew up in the neighborhood, the real mafioso in the neighborhood, right? Abio Doom, because I want to get to that real quick. Abio Doom said he found out that Biggie Smalls, Abio Doom of the Last Poets, right? He said he found out Biggie Smalls had died in Italy. He said he was in Italy, him and his son Pharaoh were over there, and they were out for a morning walk, and they saw a bunch of people gathered together, and he said, oh, something's telling me to go over there. So they went over there, and they looked, and they had a picture of Biggie with a bunch of flowers and fruits and all of that. They was making offerings to Biggie. They're like, what's happening? He said, Biggie, mafiosa. So they got him in the life after death joint picture. You know what I'm saying? Where he Frank White. He ain't Biggie no more. He Frank White, right? So he's like, no, he's not a mafiosa. He's a rapper. And then he said, one of the people looked at him and said, but don't he look like Hannibal? The real Hannibal of Carthage, the Hannibal Barak of Carthage, right? So if they can show you somebody and fool you, then they can fool anybody in the world, right? They said in the Bible that Satan deceived even the very elect. So when you start to look at how they could turn people on and turn people off, the guy who played Peoples in Shaft was the same guy who was having the night terrors about the experiments that was happening to them in the second version of the Manchurian Candidate film that Denzel Washington was in. And that Denzel Washington was a sleeper cell conduit that they utilized as an officer, and his enlisted man was becoming the president, So they're all in that briefing where they showed them, injecting folks in the arm and in the head and all of that. The guy who played Falcon, he's in there, and they're reciting the briefing on command. Oh, Sergeant Shaw was the kindest guy we ever knew, blah, 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 right? So you can't separate fact from fiction when you're inundated with these things, and when they package it in a movie form, your subconscious or your unconscious doesn't know the difference. So whether you saw it or you don't, that's the trick bag. So you're caught in the trick bag. So you could go through a war simulation. I've been in situations in the training environment where you're in a training environment, but your unconscious doesn't know the difference, and you're freaking out like it's real life. So that situation where they're shooting live rounds over your head, it makes it seem like because of the tracer rounds that they're very close to you, but they're not. You know what I mean? So you go back to Predator, right? You can't tell me Bill Duke didn't have no military training, but he didn't. But he made you believe it, right? The way he was shaving with that blue razor on his skin.
Breaking it on his skin.
What he told Carl Weathers, he said, hey, you ghosting us. You give up opposition again, I bleed you real slow.
I
Like,
believe right.
and I
Hold
leave
on,
you.
Knowledge born. We hit the hour mark. I
Right.
want you to go ahead and let the family know what you got going on with your series and whatnot. Chop it up with them. I'm gonna pull it up. And then we're gonna get back to this. This conversation is powerful, brother. I'm learning a lot. You know, it's nothing like the experience, right?
Right.
Mali in the 1300s, very wealthy brother. During the dark age of Europe was going through a dark age. Africa was thriving. It was the gold capital. Mansa Musa was considered the wealthiest man on the planet at the time. Mansa Musa had a very well-known pilgrimage to Mecca, where he went to Egypt and went to Mecca and went through Egypt, and he gave out so much gold, it threw off the Egyptian economy. In today's terms, Mansa Musa gave away what would be the equivalent of $100 million in gold.
Mansa Musa jewels. Ladies say I'm handsome, cool but cool. This is not Langston Hughes buffoons. My scholastic aptitude is tuned maroons. Revolutionaries, gangsters, goons is true. Sands of time.
All right. Let them know what they're looking at, my brother.
Yeah, that's volume 1 of Voices of the Diaspora.
Let's go
It's
to
13 volumes in total. You know,
I'm just calling, checking.
each volume is dedicated to a different aspect of our existence.
So I can my own worries. Love you.
Yeah, all you got to do is pause it. So I wanted to, showcase. Volume 1 is dedicated to the entrepreneur. Volume 2 is dedicated to our Black mothers, and that's a discussion that I had with Killer Priest. Shout out to the Iron Software Hip Hop, the one and only Killer Priest. He allowed me to utilize his songs in our interview breakdown of this album as the soundtrack to the redemption struggle from improper propaganda campaigns that separated us from the wombs that gave us birth. You know, in Islam, they say don't cut off relations with the wombs that bore you. So, our mothers, when they asked them, Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, where was paradise? He said at the feet of our mothers, right?
Right.
So womb redemption. We just came off of Earth Day yesterday. You understand what I'm saying? And I didn't see too much celebration of the earth, and we all live on Earth. That's the last time I checked. You understand? So this beautiful ode to the redemption of our daughters, of our sisters, of our wives, of the women that are in our life that have value. This is a redeeming sort of volume. So they're not in the twerk Olympics. You understand what I'm saying? They're not in the twerk Olympics being usurped and being relegated to pieces of meat. You understand what I'm saying? For consumption. So the mind behind that volume was a redeeming one. You know, our wisdoms, right? So the knowledge volume, it got knowledge born pages in it. So I wanted to create something to spark the mind and creativity in regards to the marketplace, right? 1 through 5th, right? And then when you start looking at the mother of the marketplace,
yes,
it is the woman in every society. So building on those aspects, volume 3 and 4 deal with the thought leaders, the ones who rock revolutionary principle. So if you have something and you're building something, you have to have means to be able to protect it. So the military aspects of those minds, and to show you men and women from around the diaspora who were thought leaders and challengers to the problems that exist. Volume 5 deals with long-term sustainability. You and Blue had the Facts Initiative forever. You understand what I'm saying? Like, let's make that plain. The Facts Initiative, around long-term sustainability for taking these things that are out of the sky and giving us a wardrobe to don, right? Y'all gave us the wardrobe, and y'all gave us, what we have in our mind in regards to that, to be able to present ourselves in a righteous manner, right? So when you look at volume 5 deals with science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. So the long-term sustainability of what you're seeking to protect. If you're to protect the family in that way, what's your through line, and how do you set up structures and infrastructure to be able to protect it. Volume 6 deals with content creation and the ability to be able to convert improper propaganda campaigns to a proper propaganda campaign in regards to us reclaiming our narrative. For as long as we've been alive, we've been
Yeah.
fed a healthy diet of our experience, but wasn't the story wasn't told by us. The story was told by our enemies. So, with the delineation movement, I give props to, because this is a time for you to be able to reclaim, who you are, for you to be, for you to be able to say who you are. And in that space of self-determination, you deal with naming yourselves, and also in that space of reclaiming what is yours and returning back to from which you came in regards to your family. So your family history and your family culture is indicative of who you are. Otherwise, somebody will put a lifestyle on you, and you'll be running around with that lifestyle, and they'll usurp you. An identity in crisis, as you taught, Red, is where the Christ emerges from. When there's a crisis of identity, this is where the Christ emerges from. You see what I'm saying? So, with this renewal space and this reclamation space, the writing substantiates us in the various spaces and stages. So, volume 6 deals with the necessity of reclaiming your narrative, because your narrative is out there, that you pimps and drug dealers and all forms of depravity. All of those things have a place within the society. Shout out to Obade Dayo again, because vice is another thing that controls the upper realms of society, right? So we gave away our juke joints, we gave away our intellectual property, and now we're in the process of reclaiming these things via the arts, and these things are being usurped by interlopers. So everybody is talking about this revisionist history. So in the reclamation space is something that you have to be able to reclaim. You know what I mean? So in organization and organizational structure paradigm, you deal with recruit, reclaim, and retain. So you recruit new members, you reclaim lost ones, and you retain the current membership, because the lifeblood of these organizations is for you to be able to grow. So when you look at reclamation, you're dealing with old paradigm syndromes that people are, caught up with in that regard. They're caught up with the color game, right? They're caught up with these other aspects in regards to, how you see yourself and who you are versus who people say you are. These things become important in regards to how you're going to move forward in the future. So who you are versus who someone says you are, and they're readily able to identify you. So uh, these volumes are 13 in all, and they're available for the articulation. We having a family meeting, so to speak, in that regard. We're having a family meeting, and we're sitting around the table, and we're dealing with these aspects holistically. We're not dealing with them from the vantage point of the feel good sort of space. We're dealing from the traumatic to the triumphant in that space. So these books are designed, each one of these volumes take you on a journey and a trek through the mind and the reformation space of what it looks like. So volume 7 deals with the scholars and the educators that look like you. We go and we get philosophic, and we go all of these places on the planet, but we don't return to our source. We're not looking about these aspects throughout time from that perspective. So we'll go to Greek philosophy, we'll go to all of these other pantheons in regards to that, but we won't look at self to learn that in that regard. So volume 7 profiles the contributions to the realm of education from the yesteryears to present time. And then we have volume 8, and volume 8 deals with the aspects of how we introduce these things again to each other and one another. Give me 1 second. How we deal with these aspects of one another from the perspective of what it means to win, right? So, volume 8 deals with beyond the battlefield. We got revolutionaries, we have champions, and we have explorers. So, volume 8 deals with it from that perspective. You know, after you are victorious, now, what are the next steps? You know, we might hear a lot of the murmurs in regards to the battlefield situation, and this is what we have been discussing in part. But what are the next moves in regards to after you're victorious? What does that look like? What are the next steps? So, Volume 8 deals with that from that vantage point and that perspective, and then we get to Volume 9 in the aspect which is akin to volume 6 of telling your story. You know, everybody who's listening and everybody who will listen, you have a story. You know, your birth story and your naming story become your first 2 stories. You know, last time I was with my brother Red Pill in the A, we were talking about that. Like that's the your life story in the physical realm begins with your birth story. So everybody has a birth story, and everybody's birth story has a similarity, and then everybody's birth story has a nuance, something that connects us together, right? So these become stories right there. So volume 9 deals with how to mine out your story, how to overcome procrastination, and all of these things. If you're alive, you have a story, you have a life that you lived, and then you have a story in relation to your family story. If you have siblings or if you're an only child, there's something that you're put on earth to do. So how do you mine out that story? How do you package that story? How do you tell the story together, right? So uh, that's volume 9 in a nutshell. And then there are 4 standalone volumes that are there as well. So these 4 standalone volumes, you know, deal with different aspects of self. The first one is, you know, my personal sort of memoirs. It's called From Nameless to Knowledge. There was a 7-year period where I didn't want to be identified. I was on my own self-discovery journey. You know, I had a name at birth, and then I had another name, and then I had another name, and everywhere you went on the planet, somebody was giving you another name, right? So this is something that I had to deal with in regards to my own level of self-discovery. So I had to come to my own space of knowledge of self from that regard. So who are you? That's a story, right? Who are you? And then what is your name? That's another story. And what are you here to do? That's another story. But they all have intersectionality in regards to once you figure out what they say when you're on the planet, the first 2 important days that you have in life, the day you're born and the day you know why. And they should be given to you in that manner if you come from, you know, parents that have had that or have gone under that study. If not, then you have to figure it out. So your arrival should be a celebration, and your departure should be a celebration because of a life well spent. So from nameless to knowledge is 100 reflections based off of life, based off of life, based off of combat, based off all of these things with the express purpose of people documenting and sharing their stories, right? So if y'all know Red and Blue, if y'all know KT, if y'all know Mama Pill, if y'all know the family, right? That this is a family conglomerate of healers, and truth tellers and truth seekers, right? So coming from that space of an honorable family who have a life that is lived of service. You understand what I'm saying? A lived life of service, and they have been in the trenches, so that's their lived experience. And our connection is we have been fed off of that lived experience, right? So how do we connect these dots all together with our universal family? We've been on the road together. We set up conferences and lectures, and we brought in speakers and, entertainers and the like, and all kinds of people over the years, together. I have a platform, Through the Knowledge Radio, and it's been in existence for 11 years. So 11 years of Through the Knowledge Radio is birthed out of the void that existed if y'all were listening to Know the Ledge Radio back in the day. You understand what I'm saying? If y'all were listening on Tuesdays and Thursdays, or if y'all were listening on Mondays and Fridays, whatever it was, we were tuning in on to Blog Talk. So between KTL and Miss Blue, you understand what I'm saying? We had a full schedule in regards to something to be dealing with from one aspect or another. And I remember when they hit 500 episodes, I was like, man, this is something deep, Then it was 700, and the tide was turning, and then there was a space with the void that needed to be filled, and I was standing in the gap, and Do Not Radio had appeared, 11 years ago in the month of Black August on Michael Jackson's birthday. You know what I'm saying? And the J Red Pillar and the Black Dot were my first guests. And the first episode is What is Consciousness? And there were so many people who came on that episode that night. We began to build out a legacy that was associated with telling the story of the voiceless, right? So for a decade, Do Not Radio had been dedicated to being the voice of the voiceless. When you fast forward, after you go through a cipher and you begin a new journey, now we stand as the voice of the voiceful. So the next decade will be, to highlight those stories of people from around the globe who are full of voice and who are true of voice, like the Nile Valley culture alludes to. True of voice means word is bond. You see what I'm saying? So what have you demonstrated in your life? Your existence is one, but then the things that come from you naturally become another thing in that regard. So now, how do you want to be remembered when you're no longer physically here? Is another story.
Right.
So from Nameless to Knowledge talks about that from that perspective, and legacy in that regard. And, we have people that were on our broadcast that are no longer here in the physical.
So many now. So
here.
many. Like,
Right.
could we do like a ashe? Could we say their names? So they're not forgotten. You feel me? It's very important.
Right. We have
Your Umi.
Right. We got my Umi. That's who the platform is dedicated to. The world know her as Nadine Gilliard, but she was Mukmina Muhammad in the neighborhood, and she was Nadine Muhammad in the neighborhood, and she was my grandma in the neighborhood. You understand what I'm saying? So,
Right.
We start looking at that, and my pops Mukmin Muhammad. You understand what I'm saying? Blood brother, political prisoner, died in prison. Died in Fairfax.
Fairfax, Virginia.
Yeah.
I was in Fairfax.
So
crazy.
You already know what's adjacent. You understand?
Right. All the
from
and all of that. Yeah.
All
That's
of
the
that.
good old.
So,
yeah, that was horrible.
Yeah. He passed away in confinement up there. You know what I'm saying? So he was one who was a Hafiz. He knew the Bible and the Quran word for word. and he would teach in the street the same way we taught in the street. So my legacy is my family, and it comes from my family in that regard. So, you know, my father, my mother, my grandmother, grandfather, everybody had that essence. The first time I heard that the black man was God was from the Universal Hager Spiritual Church. That was my family's church. You see what I'm saying? They still in existence. So, you know, but before I heard Elijah or Malcolm, I heard my uncle. You understand what I'm saying? So I'm going through
passing a good word through the family.
I'm going through the joint. I'm looking at this. I'm like, yo, look, hey, stop playing with me with this big G, little G stuff, blah, blah, blah. I was crazy with it, right? I went to my uncle's house. I locked the door. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, yo, what's up with this? I said, ye are gods and all of you children of the Most High, blah, blah, blah. And my uncle said, okay, I'll be right back. And he went around the corner. And I remember that this was the uncle that used to come over with that belt. You understand what I'm saying? To give me that universal. So I got shook. I went from tough guy to shook up in there. And he came back with the bylaws, right? He said, read them. And
put you in the game. Right.
We believe God is man and man is God. And I said, word? I said, how come you ain't telling me? He said, I'm a scholar with 50 years of experience. Who are you?
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Only when you're ready will he appear.
Word is bond. So it was a beautiful aspect, in you know, in that regard. You know, SKOOL Dinga is another one who is an ancestor now.
Yes,
that was on our show. Gaddafi's pop. You know what I mean? You know, political prisoner. His wife got him out of prison. You know what I mean? Talking about doing the work. You understand what I'm saying? So, like, there are so many who we had along the way that paved the way. You know, if we start looking at Dr. Delbert Blair, if we start looking at a C. Freeman L., if we start looking at, so many that came along, Brother Panic and the like. We had so many in the pantheon.
Azariah,
Dawood, Azariah, Dawood,
Dawood, Uriel Bay, Sister Myra L.
Myra L, yeah. Yes.
You know, there's so many, you know, it was people that used to be in Harlem just out there with us. Monk.
Right. Hey, Rashid's mom. You know what I'm saying?
Sister Hafiza. You know what I mean? Like, we've been through a lot. You know what I'm saying? We have a lot of we represent a lot of ancestors. And, you know, unbeknownst to many of us, they walk with us. C. Freeman L.
Yes.
Dr. Delbert Blair, Dr. Africa.
Right.
Baba Kalindi, Ai.
Right. Right.
You know, Kevin Muhammad.
Right.
So there's so many.
Dick Gregory, my mother walked with many of them, personally, Dr. Africa, personally, you know what I'm saying, taught and trained by, some of the best, right? So for her to deal with the science of Dr. Savy, right? Iridology, herbology, all of the sciences of reconstruction from a physical standpoint, emotional and psychological standpoint. You start looking at Dr. Amos Wilson, right? You start looking at Dr. Bobby Eugene Wright, Dr. Francis Cress Wilson, and so many of those, right? And then from the revolutionary aspect, in regards to that Reformation, we start looking at a Dr. Khalid Abdul Muhammad and so many.
Steve?
Right, Baba
Where
Steve
would you
Coker.
put Steve?
I would put him in the mastermind of information, right? He's our ancestral minister information, like Professor Griff is our physical manifestation, because he had wrought those regular hours when nobody was wroughting them, and he suffered for them.
Right.
He suffered for them greatly. So Steve Coakley in the
Let's talk
ancestral.
more about Steve Coakley. I want to do a whole show and do a deep dive on Baba Steve Coakley, who I had the honor of meeting, in my earlier days. I was at a lecture, and it was like I saw a celebrity, right?
Word is bond.
Yeah. I remember meeting Dr. Ben the first day that I really was on 25th, because that I tell it when I tell my story, when I tell my origin story. I hung out with the Felders in Sinetta, right? And it was a
Jack
brother.
Felder.
It was a brother named Dr. Jack Felder, another ancestors. It was a brother named Sadiq, right? He was the one who put me on, and his name was Sadiq. He used to be out there like, who shopping, who shopping, who shopping, who the God body, but he was street, right? So he let me sell. I had a shirt with patches on it, with like army patches on it. I ain't had no bread, bro. I'm talking about I was shot because I came to New York and I survived for months, you know, but I literally just came on vacay and I was living off the land. And I made a sale, boom, $40, I think. You know what I mean? That's 05, $40.
Big deal.
Right? Big deal. Yeah, that's when the dollar was the dollar. That was a big deal, baby. And then I got that monkey off my back, so I was able to go up the block and stand around with Sinetta and the Felders. And then the Felders was like, we going to the Oberia Dempsey Center. There's a class that we gonna have, and Dr. Ben's supposed to be there. And I'm like, you mean the Dr. Ben? And like, yes, the legend. I'm like, can I come?
Can I be down? Can I roll through? Can I hang with you?
Can I carry the crates? You know? And make a long story short, that night I was like, I ain't going back. I said, I'm staying right here. There's something about this area. There's something about this strip. I'm from New York, and I ain't really never, you know what I mean? Like, I ain't do the Harlem thing like this before. So it just intrigued me. You were speaking about the earlier, the layers of the community. We did a show with 363 Empire where the substrate, the mycelium network, the underground, what I would call in so many words, the label, right? The management of the conscious community, the ones that are behind the camera who you don't see in front of the camera, but they're the ones who put so many in front of the camera. But theoretically speaking, these are the planters. These are the ones who put their minds together. And even those that were in opposition of one another, the opposition actually created things. It was in the opposition where things were created, where movements were started, where people got their business together. Some people's business got more together than others. And that the war that was going on was a business war. Yeah. If you see anybody on YouTube going at it, that's a business war. So it's all business wise. It's about eyeballs, customers, market value, market share, you know, similar to what you see in any other environment. This is about this is hunter-gatherers gathering, right? So I want to speak briefly about that layer, the academia layer, right? The Amos Wilsons, the Dr. Francis Cress Welsons, the Joy DeLuries, you know, all of these names, the Eugene Adams, and them standing in the shadows of the original academia, the Mount Rushmore of the academia, the John Henry Clarks, the Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen, right? Dr. Leonard Jeffries, along with Dr. Jack Felder. There was a whole city college academia revolution. Nobody wore jeans. Nobody wore do-rags. Nobody wore their merch, right? These men had bespoke suits on. They were dressed to the T, right? And even though Dr. Ben and them were going and they were taking people to Kemet, when they saw Baba Samaj and them come with the ankhs and they were dressed traditionally, they was not feeling that. Can you speak on that early era that many people are not privy to because of the times in which they came into this knowledge?
R.I.P. Sister Bert. Sister Bert gave us the through line for what
That's
we
Buffalo,
saw.
New York?
Yes.
Yes.
Sister Bert gave us the through line for what we would see on VHS, right? And then, you know, we give it up to You know, our brother, what was our brother, you know, that was connected with Eye Opener Productions, right? That
It was
merged with,
Clemson Brown with first it was Clemson Brown at the Slave Theater with TAP,
yes, with
Transatlantic
that.
Productions. That was like
Yes,
almost akin to what
yes.
Gil Noble and them was doing.
Right, right,
He was putting in, yeah, he had production. He showcased, he was able to capture the era of the Dr. Benz and all of them that I speak of.
right,
Sister Burke introduced this new class along with the legends, along with that layer. She brought in this new layer of metaphysics and occult and a
right.
Moorish science,
So
along with
yeah,
other things.
what
I
Eye
opened
Opener
up,
Production,
yeah, Black
right,
Dot,
yeah,
Brother Shabazz,
Shabazz, right,
Brother
yeah,
Chris,
right,
Brother Rich, not the Brother Rich that
yes,
we know,
yeah,
Brother Rich
Brooklyn,
from Brook, yeah, Haitian Brother
yeah,
Rich. And
yeah,
also one more. It was Black. We named Black Dot,
yeah,
Shabazz,
right,
Chris,
yes,
Rich. Oh, that was it, I think. That might be it.
yeah,
And they
and AA,
established. Right, go ahead.
yeah, AA's late, AA is in the pantheon forever too, because of that, right? So,
Of course.
him, I see the Duke of Tears, seen him recently, and Andalusia. You understand what I'm saying? Out there
Hmm.
getting it.
Right,
Um, the pillars, right? Y'all are pillars of society, right?
right.
Ritual pillars of society. Uh, really. And this is the greatest story never told. So if you look at it from one lens, you missed it. Okay, so it deserves to have its own mysticism, and but it's also its own transparency, right? So if you know, they say it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. You understand what I'm
Mm,
saying? So in the space of, you know, all of these things that happen, they
right,
they like to act like we wasn't beefing, right? They like
right,
to act like we wasn't beefing, like there wasn't subliminals that was thrown and direct shots that was thrown and
oh,
names was dropped. You understand? Like
right,
stop
right,
playing like we the manufacturers and just come along and just all of a sudden we doing smack DVD. Like come on, fam. Y'all better go listen to what, you know, some of our ancestors had to say about some of the people who still walking around breathing. You understand?
right,
Like naming the names, not just Boule members and, you know, all of that whole situation. Like really naming names, giving facts, dates, and times. You understand? So, like I said, my mother walked them streets. My father walked them streets. Like you ain't lived until you seen a dope fiend come out of a nod because of valerian root. You understand? Valerian root was like smelling sauce for a dope fiend.
mm,
So, you know, the houses that they showed on Godfather of Harlem, because everything's available now, but
right.
it's nuanced to
Very
help
new,
people kick
very
the
nuanced.
habit of heroin. You've never lived until you've seen somebody addicted to heroin. You don't even know what that means. You understand what
Right,
I'm saying? And what New York looked like when it was heroin versus when it was crack. You know what I'm saying?
right,
So before crack, it
right.
was
The
heroin.
Scourge, King
Yeah,
Heroin,
right.
destroyed it.
So right. So that was a bomb, right? That was a bomb, and that connects
Chemical.
to chemical warfare. It connects to the Korean and Vietnam era. That's what it was about. The Vietnam era, arguably, was a underplay, but the overplay in the actual Vietnam era was about rubber.
Mm,
So the rubber war that took place was a greater war that was usurped by the drug situation. So
right,
the rubber for Goodyear blimp tires, when you start looking at tires and all of the things that rubber is a conduit for,
yes,
sneakers and all that, like they become a whole nother thing that's there. Like if they say if you got rubber soles and you get struck by electricity, it's why you're still alive. You
right.
understand?
I
So
remember
it
that.
should it should tell you the rubber trees that they were dealing with in that regard. So, we never get away from the warfare situation. So when you start looking at the landscapes and what it was on the street to have any sort of knowledge of self from that regard, you still had to contend with what it meant to be hungry and starving, what it meant to be folks selling their bodies and selling their children. You understand? Like you're not like a sick dope head with a dope needle on the block was the dangerous person. That was something out of our minds. You understand what I'm saying? When they showed my man that was in Clockers, my
Yeah.
man who had just died, RIP, he was a monster. You understand? Like he was out of his mind. He wasn't crack ain't get him. He said, "Oh, you took a ride on that A train, sharing needles and what that meant for you." You know what I'm saying? You up out of here.
And they had
You
the
up
he was
out of
doing
here.
that too.
Right.
I remember
Right.
Sutek was breaking it down. He was like, nah, we was 12 and 13 with the dope fiend Nard. You know what I mean? Hitting bags and everything. Like that dope came through and turned Black America upside down. So
Yes.
when crack came through Reagan, it was really picking up the pieces. You feel me?
Right. Right.
They didn't just come and wash up a sandcastle that
Right.
was built very high. No, we were in rebuilding phases. Our people were rebuilding, and then they smacked them with that rock.
Right. From the designer that was a small class to an epidemic that was everybody that blew up overnight. You know what I'm saying? That blew up overnight. Like you blinked and looked. Even heroin was a class that was relegated to the artist, right? To the musicians. It wasn't,
Right.
a party favor for everybody. You understand what I'm saying? So it's like uh that girl was available to, you know, corporate and marketing execs and things like that, like people who wanted to let loose and get wild. But that boy,
Right.
oh boy, you
Oh
understand what I'm
boy.
saying? Oh boy, that was a whole nother thing right there.
Right.
So they showed the world and they were looking for, distribution networks. So these are all of the things that came before consciousness, right? Consciousness came as something that was helping people
Cope.
defeat that monkey and deal with these other mechanisms, right? But then you have crack consciousness, right? So there was heroin consciousness and then there was crack consciousness. Crack
Right.
consciousness turned shit into wrestling, right? So there was a whole nother situation. Like they had show Ultimate Warrior on one of the wrestling joints with a needle in his arm. You know what I'm saying? So you had the steroid sort of, situation when you look at the program and, my
Yeah,
man
boy, juiced
taking the
up.
taking those joints. Like so there were personages that became larger than life personages with no actual applications for the people. So, we could do a good sermon wherever, right? But we didn't have to prove anything, one. And two, we didn't have to provide anything. So, you know, it's play at your own risk once that came. It went from substantaneous, the academic journey of the doctors bringing the information back and actually showing us our sojourn around the circumnavigation of the globe
Yeah.
to relegating us to parts of the prison planet and not looking at our experience beyond oppression.
Mm.
So you had to deal with a mind. Like my mother used to tell me in the debriefs about clients that she would see, she said the tragedy or the worst thing that could happen to somebody that's sick is they start to feel better once you start working with them. Because
Right.
once they start feeling better, they're no longer
Back
regimented
about it.
to what it was. So when the sickness comes back tenfold, it's worse now
Right.
than if you would have stayed regimented in regards to this road of recovery, right? So, like I said, the dope had nod, but in the dope had sickness, right? In between nods, a dope head on the block taught me about the entire Princess Charles, Prince Charles, Lady Di situation, the OJ hit, all of that in between nods. You understand? Like he broke the whole thing down, like yo, boom, 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 between nods, right?
Right.
And this is the value that was on the street. This was still the value that was on the street, regardless of how it appeared in its dilapidated state, in the state that it was in defense of, right? So the
Shit, that was
predators that
Claude
were
back
running
then.
around, right?
That
We
was
start talking
Claude.
about
The
that was
wino at the
word
liquor store, that was Claude.
right,
You could ask him
right,
something and he'd be like, "Brrr," start
right,
running down shit.
running it down.
You can't get that
And
everywhere.
word, you can't get that anywhere, right? You can't teach that to a large language model, so it can't give it back to you. So if you didn't get it, you don't have it. Only way you
Right.
can get it is somebody who was there to witness it, who has the faculties to be able to give it back to you now. So our own stories and our own movies, right? Like we watched Snowfall, like we needed a reminder, right? We
Right.
lived it. We watched Snowfall like, oh, this is a good show. Like, what happened to Duke and
I
all
didn't
that? Like,
even watch. I never watched that show too. Just for the record.
so, right, we lived it. We didn't need to watch it. We didn't need somebody to show us paid in full. We lived paid in full. We didn't need nobody to
Right.
show us that. But
Right. That
to
depiction.
highlight, right, our depiction of what it meant to be growing up conscious and all of the things that happened and all of the pitfalls that came along with it. And you had to fight for your life because you were smart.
You had to fight, bro.
You had to fight for your life because
You
you
had
were
to,
smart.
yeah,
You
you had
understand?
to fight.
Yeah. Somebody gonna come see you because you knew all the answers to the tests in the class, right?
You got
So
the
somebody
nerve,
trying to
right?
see you, right?
Yeah.
And they're being abused at home. You don't know nothing about that, right? So their mother selling their food stamps to get high. So you don't know what they dealing with. All you know is y'all interface, right? So either you selling crack rock or you got a wicked jump shot, like Big say, but you had the snaps, you had the comeback, you had the tough exterior, you had to be able to brave the elements because
You
somebody
had to
looked
rumble.
at you. Yeah.
Yeah, you had to be
Otherwise
ready
you
to
was food,
rumble.
right?
Uh-huh.
You was food.
Otherwise, you was food. Yeah.
Where's the phone? So anybody who was coming out in those environments had to be prepared to brave the elements. If you were an evangelist or a reformationist of any sort, there had to be an element that was respected of you as a person. They say God is no respecter of a person, but if the gods was out, that's what that meant. You understand what I'm saying? Like, so if the nation was out, that's what that meant. If the Moors was out, that's what that meant. You had to be prepared. You had to be able to stand on your truth or square. You had to be able to show and prove in no limited time, right? So
Right.
kind of sounds contrary to what I was saying to show, but you didn't necessarily have to prove because the minds that you were dealing with were not in the, to be able to disprove. So that gave rise and way to some of the predatory minds that came in and sought to usurp. They didn't start in the conscious community. They started in the conscious community before that. They came in as agents. They came in as boule. They came in as all of these other interlopers. That was their assignment. This is how they cut their teeth, right?
Right.
So just like we wasn't beef, we were beefing. We were being infiltrated as well. You understand what I'm saying? So the names that we
in
could
all
call
ways.
out, right? This is where Steve Coakley would come in. The names that we could call out, there's a billion names that we didn't know. And we
Right.
took the fight away from and took the boogeyman out of the sky and talking about systems to people with names and addresses and children and phone numbers.
Right.
So when we start looking at psychological profiles and all these other aspects of it, this became something where, you became a remedy, but too much of the remedy became the poison, right? Like you said back in the day, if the hero stays around long enough, they become the villain.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So when the hero stays around long enough, they become the villain. So now you go from, the Dark Knight to the Dark Knight of the Soul, right? So you're like, what am I doing out here? What am I doing all of this for? And you become dissatisfied. And once you become dissatisfied, you know what happens? You go from 5% to 10%. That's only 5%. You don't see it until it becomes 85%. You don't see a sickness or a weakness in anybody till they start fading. They start looking like Skeletor. That's 85%, right? When you start looking at 10%, the 10% is a variance. It's a variance of 5%. So it's drawn up in the 5 minutes to which the naked eye can hardly detect. So you can, the naked eye can hardly detect what's happening. You understand what I'm saying? This is why it's controversy back and forth about the earth, if it's flat or if it's round or if it's spinning or if it's not spinning. All of this BS, right?
Right.
Indiscriminate. But this becomes, it goes from the best part to the poor part right in front of your face because you can't notice a subtle change. If you know somebody to be the God, then they the God. You don't know they Christian now. You understand what I'm saying? You don't know whatever that is, that subtle change until you see it bad. Then you like, now Shorty looking like Shorty from In Too Deep. Oh, she come to the church service and she looking bad. You understand what I'm saying? She went from looking bad physically to looking bad physically.
Looking bad physically, right?
So the transformation that was happening becomes true in the inverse. We saw people who was knuckle draggers. You know how you call them, man? Knuckle dragging 85ers, right?
Right.
So somebody taught them that they was God, and they began to walk upright. They're not dragging their knuckles anymore. But just like my mother was talking about that dis-ease body and the cure, once they start feeling better, then all of a sudden they create elitist societies now. Now all of a sudden you forgot you was a knuckle dragger. You thinking you got something that the general public don't need no access to. So you don't go back and get them. So you don't deal with your first non-born. Your first non-born never come into existence. You know what I'm saying? So you're like, oh, I'm keeping this for myself, right? So with the Apollo Creed Rocky situation, with Rocky IV and Ivan Drago situation, Apollo has to seek to try to prove to himself that he's still that dude, that he ain't civilized like Rocky, because this is how Rocky got knocked out by Clubber Lang, you know.
Right.
Shout out to my brother Che Black. He said that's when the movie should have went off. He said he never watched it past that point, so he never know what happened. He said after he fell and the Mick fell, he cut the joint off. And I was like, that's perfect. So we need to know when to detach from something, right? Or someone. So from that point, we don't get the Rocky situation with Apollo. Like, there is no tomorrow. How can he resurrect this dude from the dead and then stand in front of the Soviet who juiced up and he couldn't beat him? You know what I'm saying? And then his son couldn't beat his son. So somebody had to, train him in a way. So he had to bring him back from the dead. Like, these are the terminology that's being utilized because they're showing the might of the Soviet Union versus the Italian stallion in the ring.
Right.
None of this has anything to do with us. So the might of the Asiatic, right, versus the stubbornness of the other Asiatic, right? Because ain't no such thing as Europe. So, but they use the rope and the hillside to bind you in to say, okay, yeah, we're a continent, so you're dealing with 7 continents, right? But that's a trick. So back to consciousness, we got the consciousness in the aspect of the 85, 10, and 5%. We had the people that go wherever the wind blow. Then we had, the people who were seeking to control the wind. You understand? And then the town criers that sound crazy, that don't sound so crazy nowadays, right?
Right.
Oh, y'all bugging, right? Ain't nobody out here for that, blah, 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 blah. Then they're like, hey, yo, what's up with that?
Yeah, what about that? Yeah, what about that shit you was saying,
I was listening, but you know what I'm saying? Like,
I wasn't really, I was
yeah. So this becomes something. So I look back in the Sankofa effect. One of the standalone books that I have in the ebook series deals with the Sankofa effect. The looking back to move forward. So I can understand Steve Coakley now as a father, than I did when I was just a son.
Right.
So, there were things that was different. There was things that he put on. There was things that he sacrificed. He had to move away from his family and keep his family away from him because people was trying to take him up out of here. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So, like, you lose your livelihood, you lose your job, you lose everything that you own, all of those things. So he became to a place where he wasn't relying on any of those things. I know his son, I know his ex-wife, I know his family very well. We just did something for him on his transition day 4/11, right? Like we do every year. And his son,
Honors.
and to hear his son speak, and as much as his son, from the early years didn't want to sound like his father, who else he gonna sound like? He looked just like him. You understand what I'm
Right.
saying? I just don't want him to have the atmospheric pressure of thinking he has to live up and become his father. You can't be your father. Your father was your father. You are the son. So when they see you, they see the father automatically, right? So give way and credence to what your father laid for you, and you be about your father's business, right? And your mother's work. There's a grand unification. He's not going to be able to give us 5,000 lectures. His pops did that already. You know what I'm saying? But he can make a through line on the mother continent where he got a think tank over there. You see what I'm saying? So all you got to do come there and think. So if that's a takeaway from your pops, yeah. All right. So now we can put all these other things that he physically did together to give him the honor due. So that's where your mother and your father and your family come together for that. You know what I mean? So,
Facts.
so many credence is given, but we give credence in the wrong spaces and places of people, right? So with the archives, we get a chance to be able to come back around and make it right. You know what I mean? That was the only thing DMX said in that movie Belly that I agree with. If you got a chance to make it right, you make it right. I learned that
Right.
from you. That's what he said. You know what I'm saying?
Nah, man.
Otherwise,
Look,
you waste your time.
this has been a powerful part one, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to continue this conversation. We have a part two coming very soon. I'm going to chop this one up and put some video clips to it. When we was talking about all of these movies and all of these, the visuals really push it to the limit. You feel me? But the foundation has already been laid. The groundwork has already been laid. The case has already been laid. Shout out to all of my Generation Xers. But more importantly, shout out to the ones who are not Generation X, the ones who did not live through this. Shout out to y'all, especially because you get to get enlightened and educated, and you learn something brand new. For the people who lived through this, they're reminded. You get to learn something brand new because it is very important to understand the programming and the layers of programming that has taken place to the generation that may be your parents, but definitely the generation that came before you to precede you. They move differently because of the different forms of programming. They see things differently because of the different forms of programming, and that's vice versa for the younger generation. We got to understand their programming and not just gloss over it, but do a little bit of we have to look at it through a scientific metaphysical lens. Henceforth, why I do peel back the hip hop culture and we do apply this quote unquote very unique perspective, and we operate, we put on an operating table, we commit surgery on this culture and pick it apart. Because when you begin to do that, you begin to see the nuances, you see the patterns, you begin to see the code. And then by seeing the code, you could rewrite the code, right? You literally could rewrite the code. I want to end it by asking you this, and then we have a world premiere, right? Premiere. Moving into the next show that we do, being that this is about programming and you have been a part, you're very wise when it comes to the nuances of the programming and whatnot. What is the best way, right? And have you come across the teachings that speak about being able to change the future by retroactively changing the past, right? Being able to now have because now we live in this world post seed dance, post nano banana, post imagine 2. where you literally can't tell what's real anymore. Like those days are over with because the shit has gotten so good. Now we could tell our stories. We could put our images out there. We could recreate our folklore and the styles that we want. We now have access to the most powerful thing in the world, and that is the silver screen, the paintbrush, and the ability to distribute. I saw you putting up Black Dot's books. Shout out to Black Dot. I would even challenge all of my creatives out there. We should begin to grab these books, starting with ISIS papers, starting with what about our quote unquote classics, the Dr. Ben
Yep.
classics, the
Right.
libraries. Just start with the libraries of everybody that's an ancestor first, right? That's a whole Alexandria library. And then go through the AI, come through Imaginarium. That's what we're doing over here with the Imaginarium and the 72 claws. We're going to create content creation machines that work automatically, automation, right?
Right.
Let's turn all of that into some type of ephemera. Let's turn all of that into some merch. Let's turn that into quote unquote assets. Um, the estate is going to be taken care of handsomely, right? Henceforth, why I said let's do that first. Let's not forget the ancestors, because you know, if you, depending on what time of the day that you ask me about the technology, I would say, yeah, that's the ancestors throwing the alley oop. That's coming
That's fun.
from the other
Yeah.
side. They hitting third, they hitting them Steph Curry shots. They rain in manna. I wake up, bro. I don't know how people see this thing, but I wake up, it's manna. It's, you know what I mean? It's manna, as nano manna coming out the sky. It's just raining. It's raining apps. Hallelujah. It's raining apps. Yeah, yeah. It's raining code. Hallelujah. It's raining codes. Yeah, yeah. I mean, non-stop. Ain't nobody told me it was the rainy season. The shit don't stop, man. You know what I'm talking about? Manners on manners. You know what I
Right.
mean? Mythos on mythos. You know, and then they got the fly names with it, so you can invoke. So I wanted to know, because you know you've already done it before. How could we begin to manipulate the timeline, and how could we begin to manipulate this quantum reality that we exist in, utilizing the arts?
I think that's the greatest question of all time, because the artists tell the tone and the truth of the time. This is why they usurp the art in the artist in the artistry, and they seek to water it down step by step. We deal in the science of secrecy too. You know, everything is not for everybody, but all of these things from the art world are for public consumption. So if you see something, it's supposed to be a keepsake. It's not something you're supposed to give a tutorial on. This is how you crit walk. What? So non-affiliates out here doing this because of, like, you know what that means? Like, if you can't do that everywhere in the public. You understand what I'm saying? You have to answer for those things. So as long as we, give our culture out freely, people are talking about things freely, all of those things, they're devalued. And the practitioners suffer based off of these aspects, because we are no longer stewards and vanguards of culture. If we didn't learn anything from hip hop, when we talking about hip hop culture, KRS said rap is something you do, hip hop is something you live. Where are the degrees? Where are the lessons? You understand what I'm saying in that regard? So if this is where it came from, then in order to keep art, right? One of the things that they said about art is that it appreciates over time. Are we in a depreciation of hip hop? Or are we in an appreciation of hip hop? Is hip hop appreciating over this last 50 something years? or has it depreciated in regards to value? Is the price up or the price down? It depends, right? They milk the streams to their, they'll tell you, oh, here you go. There's some money in the stream. There goes pennies on the dollar for you, right? So if you take it off of those streaming spaces and you go back to direct to consumer, say whatever you want about this conscious community. We was direct to consumer, and direct to consumer was so great that we was all over the world. We were in the war zones. You understand what I'm saying?
Let them know when you was in the foxhole, how you was receiving your information and your intelligentsia, how you was receiving your intelligentsia and your downloads.
Word up. I'm telling you. So, like, what consciousness, what metaphysics was able to do was to help me keep the men and women that I serve with out of the hell of their mind that come along with war. You understand? So, direct to consumer, direct to customer, you see what I'm saying? Or business to business. Folks was able to get these things wholesale and sell in retail. They had that work for you. You understand? Like, so when you take back control and power of your narrative, your story, and your art, then you set your children, your grandchildren, great grandchildren up forever. With the example that I gave with Steve Coakley Jr., he has his father's work and his father's face. So, and he has his father's name. So he can go someplace and they be like, hey, I know your father. 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 Come here, come here, come here, come here, come here. But there's also, I know your father, with the arms folded up. You can't come here. You understand? So he got the double-edged sword in regards to what it was, but who he is. So he has the task where he needs the team to be able to go through and make the movies and the books that his father couldn't make. You understand what I'm saying? So, shout out to my brother Che Black. Once again, he got the Agent series. It's the best work I've seen digitally since
shout out
Steve
to
Coakley
Che Black.
Sr.'s work.
My
You know what
God.
I'm saying? So when we do our 1-2 with Steve Coakley, I would love to bring him on so we could premiere his Agent series because he did that work. He did I'm going into old newspaper files and all these things together to be able to curate the proper legacy and culture for a lot of these vultures that's running around. And rest in peace to our brother Nana Kuntu, as the world knows, is Del Jones with Culture Bandits, because that's where it really came from. Because if they say Culture Bandit, this is who they have to give homage to. If they say Culture Vulture, they're talking about another vulture. You understand what I'm saying? So with our art and our artistry, taking it back and reclaiming it and making it available direct to customer, like you gotta get it from us. If you didn't learn that lesson from the conscious community, you missed everything else that was important. Everything else will confuse you. All of this other stuff that they're out there teaching, you had the opportunity to get it direct, so people could be like, "Yo," and accessibility too. So the artistry is one layer, and then accessibility is another layer. They could call you and be like, "Yo, brother Red Pill, on this gangsterism and service to white supremacy DVD, you was talking about blah blah blah. Can you explain that to me?" And you could get that. You could get that. Now you can still get that on consultation. You understand what I'm saying? Like, so
Right.
booking the consultation because the mind has elevated. So making something that you gave for free available for consumption for people to have mastery about. Like, what does this mean right here? Fear of a Black or More Messiah since what, 2012, 2011? Now, the courses, this is the coursework. They shutting down schools, who cares? Your children should be in your own academies anyway.
Right.
One of the things Imam Jamil Alameen said, he said, get your children out of the Cub Scouts and get them into the Black Guard. So where's the Black Guard that he had the Vanguard? You understand what I'm saying? So they tunneling around and usurping. Taliban meant student. You understand? That meant student. Madrasa meant school. So they had the madrasas in the Taliban, and the Taliban don't speak Arabic. Okay? So they were depending on somebody else to give them. But they were Afghani warfighters that take you to the mountains and clean your clock. You
Right.
understand? Go back to Red Dawn, and they was talking about, where did I see this? Oh, I seen this in Somalia. Oh, I saw this in Afghanistan in the mountains. And those was the the Iran Contra kind of precursors of what it meant in 88, 89 versus what it means now. So who
Mm.
can go back into those spaces and redeem in value? Rakim gave us Ayatollah Khomeini. You understand what I'm
Right.
saying?
They damn
So
sure did.
from the father to the son. You understand what I'm saying? I'm at war a lot. Like I'm War Sadat. Like go back and listen to what it was saying with a different set of lens in your mind and understand why they had to take things away from hip hop and distort it in a way, because you ain't know who Ayatollah Khomeini was in 71, so you ain't gonna know who he was in 79. So you damn sure not gonna know in 2026. So
Right.
all these things work together. But if you see this picture of Hulk Hogan versus Iron Sheik, you remember that? You could go back to it. You could go back to it, and you hear the crowd chanting USA. You see what I'm saying? So again, these Hulkamaniacs and Hollywood Hogan and all of these personages go from bad to good to good to bad to bad to good to good to bad, like a presidential race and a rating. It goes up and it goes down. It fluctuates. So again, if you don't know who you are, then everything else will confuse you. So the
Right.
artistry and the art have to go back in the hands of the artist, and they have to find their tribe of people that will sustain and support them long term. And you have to do a deal together with your audience. These streaming networks are okay, but this thing is going away. What are you going to do with your intellectual property? Because we pay money into Blog Talk just to keep our archives in the digital space. And again, for the record, Red, you was the first one to say that the revolution would be digitized.
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
so you got that, and you look up, and there's no more Blog Talk. Now, what about your archives? You understand what I'm saying? So if you don't have them backed up somewhere, you might have lost them. People take things. People steal things.
Like
You
losing
understand
a
what I'm
bank.
saying? Word.
It's like losing
Right.
a. It's like a bank burning with all of your assets in it. You know what I'm talking about?
Word is bond.
Like
Right. And the
massive
FDIC
work.
only insures you up to a certain amount. Right. And they'll tell you what it is. They could burn it down tomorrow, and then what? The ones in the zeros, all of a sudden they're not in your account, or your account is closed. It's inaccessible. So if you don't take this thing back, or something that you love, and invest to build out through your audience, how your children going to receive an inheritance and an increase from what you created. You know what I mean? So, Brother Red Pill, thank you for the time. Thank you for the love. If they're listening to this stream now, they can get all 13 of these books from me directly for $75 on the strength of you. That's 50% discount from what it's listed online, 150. They could get them, all 13 of them. Something for you in every one of these books. There's
For my
music in there.
homeschoolers, right?
Right. There's everything
Seeing how
that you
thorough
could
those books
utilize.
were.
Right.
And for the record, I don't want to put, that's your work, right? That's not like the AI you've done.
Nah,
That was your hand. That's your
my hand.
that's
Yeah.
your sweat equity, correct?
Yeah. Of course.
Okay. I just had to, because I want people to know that you put that together with care, and
Right.
you was meticulous. Not to say that somebody using the AI wasn't, but yeah, definitely salute for your work. Salute for what it is that you always have been doing since I known you, and that's putting in that work.
Right.
Do the Knowledge Radio, ladies and gentlemen. When do you broadcast?
We on Fridays, and we're on Tuesdays. Tuesdays and Fridays we on. You can catch us.
Indeed. Drop your link. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we got a world premiere. We will be back with Third Eye Thursdays later tonight, probably 8 p.m. Eastern. Here's the brother's Cash App. Does he have a website? They want to know.
DoTheKnowledgeRadio.com or DoTheKnowledge.com. Either or.
DoTheKnowledgeRadio.com or DoTheKnowledge.com. Either or, ladies and gentlemen. So yes, indeed. Shout out to the God. Part 2. We're gonna fire it up. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yes, sir. Appreciate
Peace to
you.
the family.
Peace.
El Claudel collecting silk robes. The Imaginarium, the yellow brick roads are unlocking codes, connecting nodes on this silk road. El Claudel collecting silk robes. The 44 gods wrote the 48 laws, and now Imaginarium, the yellow brick roads are unlocking codes, connecting nodes on this silk road. El Claudel collecting silk robes. The 44 gods wrote the 48 laws, and now we invoked and invoking the 42 claws. The return of the sunburnt moors, northwest of Maxim Tours. Open claw, open sesame, we open the doors. Now it's tokens galore, rubber bands on the floor, 100 grand on the left hand of the mall. We in the land of the Moors, we claiming every corridors, from Atlantis to the shores of Florida to the mounds of Mississippi. This is the sound of the inner city, home of the gritty, from the neighborhoods where the clowns were shitty and the crown was on.
Ladies and gentlemen, Imaginarium is on Friday. Come and sign up to the school. Come and sign up to the school. Learn how to turn your ideas into artwork, your artwork into assets. Come and sign up to the school, ladies and gentlemen. The QR code is right there. Let's go, Imaginarium.
Yellow brick roads are unlocking codes, connecting nodes on. Yellow brick roads are unlocking codes, connecting nodes. Imaginarium, the yellow brick roads are unlocking codes, connecting nodes on this silk road. El Claudel collecting silk robes. The 44 gods wrote the 48 laws, and now we invoked and invoking the 42 claws. The return of the sunburnt moors, northwest of Maxim Tours. Open claw, open sesame, we open the doors. Now it's tokens galore, rubber bands on the floor, 100 grand on the left hand of the mall. We in the land of the Moors, we claiming every corridors, from Atlantis to the shores of Florida to the mounds of Mississippi. This is the sound of the inner city, home of the gritty, from the neighborhoods where the clowns were shitty and the crown was on Nipsey. The marathon continues, we won't stop this campaign until we take back all of our towns, all 60 in the meantime. I'm on GitHub, getting to the money, running swiftly, you get me? They tried to say the best nation wasn't your imagination. Fam, are you kidding me? Fam, are you shitting me?
Just open your third on Thursday. Lord, the food, the art, the clothes, the Vatican's getting exposed fast. We put the show on the road. You better stay on your toes. I was till the land focused on the ego. Then I opened my heart, let go of the ego. Grand stacking up these C notes. Facts, facts, yeah. We gon' put this shit on our backs. Facts, facts. We in your city, pull up where we at. Facts, facts. Peace, love and light. Peace, love to the family. Peace, love and light to the family. Peace, love and light to the family.
These days and time, black man, is going to be the time that you have been waiting for. You came here for a reason. Whatever pressure, whatever adversity, whatever the fuck you feel, I don't know what you feel, but whatever you may be feeling is going to push you, and it's going to provoke you, and it's either going to make you or break you, similar to how pressure busts pipes or the shit makes diamonds.